Okay, last lecture we ended up by talking about the three models that were designed to see how urban areas are structured, where people live and why they live there, where there are business services, etc., etc. We talked about the concentric zone. We also talked about the sector zone, where you have the CBD, the central business, and several sectors radiate from there outwards. We ended up by talking about the multi-nuclei model. Today, we're going to start by applying these models. How do they play out on the ground in cities, in urban areas in the United States and in other parts of the world? This first slide here shows University of Chicago Center of Services for Students. Just like here, RSC, we have services around us. We have restaurants close by. We have a gym. We do have apartments on campus, but we also have places nearby where some students can reside, etc., etc. So let's get on to what is known as the social area analysis. Models of urban structure help us understand where people with different social characteristics tend to live and why. Why are there so many African Americans and Black people in Northern Tulsa, for instance? Where are there so many Caucasians in Southern Tulsa? This type of setting plays out in various parts of the United States and in Canada also, and in some other parts of the world. The census tract normally approximates about 5,000 residents, and where possible, they want to get it within the neighborhood boundaries. So whenever they take a census, they divide each place into census tracts, and this census tracts estimated to have about 5,000 people living there. And where possible, they want it to be at par with the neighborhood. So in calculating or in defining or in explaining what is social area analysis, what do they do? This is a statistical analysis where you identify the people of similar living standards. For instance, people that are making $60,000 or more will tend to live in the same neighborhood. Then you might also look at the ethnic composition of that neighborhood and the lifestyle. Whenever they compute data, collect data for census, they will ask you your socioeconomic status, the median family income. They will ask you your educational level. Did you complete high school or whatever educational level? And they will ask you for your ethnicity or race. So they factor in all of these to calculate social area analysis. Living standards mainly from income, ethnicity and race. Their lifestyle will include, some habits, but that will include some habits, but they don't normally ask much about that on census. So the social area analysis will find out where people are located and why they're in urban areas. These models have been criticized recently, concentric, sector, and the multi-nuclear model, because they are old. Some people say they are old. 1945 was when multi-nuclear was created. And they say they are too simplistic. But mind you, all models are not reality. They try to abstract from reality. So a model cannot be as complex as the real world. But at least what they factor into the model will guide us at least to get a semblance of what is out there in terms of where people live and why they live there. So let's see how we can apply the concentric, sector, and multi-nuclear model here in America. For the concentric model, remember, we said that the older houses, like those immigrants coming, were living closer to the CBD, and the middle class were living outside zone, and then the high class were living further away from the CBD. So in this case, older houses are much likely to be located closer to the inner ring, but newer houses constructed nowadays in suburbs will be located some distance away from the CBD and not next door to the other houses. Let's take a look here. In San Antonio, what do we see? 10% of the new houses, 10% and above of the new houses are in the outer rings. these are the newer suburbs. 4 to 10% are within this area. And those that are inner, close to the inner ring, are below 4% of new houses close to the inner ring. So you have the older houses here, you have the not too older houses here, and you have the brand new houses. Most of them are here in the suburbs. So for the sector model, what it says is that those people with higher income are unlikely to live in the same neighborhood with those with very low incomes. We see it in various cities in America. If you are making $100,000 and above, you will not be in the same neighborhood with somebody making $35,000 or $30,000 a year. Definitely, you will not be in the same neighborhood. So in terms of the sector model, what do we see here? In San Antonio, those people that are making $90,000 and above are in the new suburbs, this shade of green. Those that are middle class making between 50 and 90,000 are located in these places, here, 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 and here. And those that are making below 50,000 are closer to the inner ring, you see. So these are like the inner city or close to the inner city, the very, very old places, old houses. Then you have here. Then you have those that are between 50 and 90,000 here. And the rich ones making $90,000 and above annually, where do they live? In newer suburbs, distance away from the very poor. For the multi-nuclear model, it says that people of similar ethnicity or race are likely to live near each other. I pointed out earlier that we see that out here in Tulsa, as in other cities. You go to North Tulsa, mainly Caucasians. You go to North Tulsa, mainly Black or African Americans. You go to South Tulsa, mainly to Caucasians. And if you go to, is it East or West? One of those, where you have more of Latinos. If you go to Chicago, South Chicago is mainly Black or African Americans living there. North Chicago is mainly white, and West Chicago is mainly Hispanics. This plays out in most cities. Let's see how it plays out in San Antonio. Multi-nuclear model. What do we see? Most of the Latinos, 75% or more, are living in central and southern parts of San Antonio, according to this map. Most of the Black are living in central eastern part of San Antonio, indicated here in purple. And most of the Asian Americans are living in northern, northeastern and northwestern San Antonio. The Caucasians are living here and here in the outer suburbs of San Antonio. We have a few here, but most of them are living in the outer suburbs of San Antonio. So there is that tendency of people of similar sociocultural background tend to cling or live amongst each other. What this map is saying is, it's not that all of the people living here are Hispanics, but majority, 70, perhaps 80, perhaps 90%. It's not that all of the people live here are African Americans or Black, but it could be 70, 80, or even 90%. There might be a few others. Similarly here, it's not that everybody living here are Asians, but a reasonable number of them are. Any questions so far about the application of concentric, sector, and multi-nuclear models, in this case, in the city of San Antonio? Any question for me or comment? Is any of you familiar with San Antonio in Texas?
I went there a few years ago.
Okay. So does this map show what plays out there in terms of where people live?
Well, I only went down there for touring, but I never got to see the.
Okay, you did not. Yes, you are busy as a tourist enjoying yourself. Okay, yeah, but I want to believe so because experts normally do these maps. So I think that I'm sure of the south, the Hispanics, mainly in the south and part of San Antonio, because I have a friend, a teacher in that area, who have told me repeatedly that there are so many Hispanics in southern San Antonio. Let's talk about European cities. As we mentioned last lecture, when I talked about the objectives, there's a clear-cut distinction between the structure of urban areas in European cities versus those in North America, United States and Canada. What do we find out? More people live in the CBD. A good number of Europeans live, especially the rich ones, live in the CBD. Here we have more of the poor living in inner cities. These rich people live in high density residential areas in the CBD, in the downtown areas. And they also have consumer services that they need. Restaurants, departmental stores, etc. Because of the high volume of residential, of people living in cities in the CBD area, downtown areas in Europe, there are so many consumer services close by. You also have some public services like parks are located there. And most of these parks are old. Most of these buildings were constructed between 1300 and 1700, part of what we call the Victorian architecture or the Elizabethan architecture or even medieval architecture. So these buildings are old and they preserve them. So parks will be there. You might have some museums, which is part of the historical core of these buildings. But what is significantly different between European cities in terms of the type of buildings is they don't have skyscrapers. Unlike here, where we have several big cities with skyscrapers in the CBD, in or other areas of the city. In most European cities, you don't have tall buildings. You don't have skyscrapers. They preserve the historical core. The old museums are there. The old churches and synagogues are there. The parks are there that have been there for a long time. So also, as I mentioned earlier, several rich people live in the inner city. They want to be close to these ancient monuments and museums, etc. Also, they want to be close to entertainment. Whilst the poor live in the periphery, the poor live in suburbs, and the poor people that live in suburbs in Europe live in high-rising buildings. They don't live in one-story buildings as in America. So let's get this clear. There are several differences between the structure of European cities. One, unlike North American cities, the rich live in the CBD. They have their consumer services that they need there. Secondly, there are several old monuments and old structures like parks, like museums, like even royal house mansions that are in those CBDs. Then also the poor live in the periphery, or what we can call the suburbs. And most of these poor live in high-rising buildings. So those are the major differences between the structure of European cities versus those in North America, Canada, and the United States. Any question or comment? So this is an example of the sector pattern in Paris, France. Remember, I said the rich live in the inner city. They live in the CBD. And here they live in the CBD and in a sector, a couple of sectors, radiating from the central area outwards. So this is a sector going towards central northwest, and this is a sector going to central southwest. So this is a couple of sectors. The rich people live here, and all here, and a few of them live here. And those rich people make at least 1,800 euros a month. Then you have those that make between 1,000 and 1,799 euros. They live mainly here, not too far from the rich. But where are the poor? Those that make less than 1,000 euros a year. Look at them. They live here, distance away from the very rich. So this is how the sector model plays out in France. About 4 years ago, I had a student from France in one of my classes, and he confirmed that this is exactly how it plays out there in Paris, where in this northwest and southwest sector is where the very rich people live in Paris, France. What do we observe here also in Paris? These inner cities, these downtown areas have places where the rich shop. Here they are shopping flowers. I mean, street markets. These are the rich people. They live close to these places, these horticultural stores, and they can just, some of them just take a stroll, walk and get there. The concentric zone model has been applied frequently to cities in developing countries. The inner rings have higher income people, just like in Europe. So there is some amount of similarity, at least where the very rich live. Like in European cities, the very rich in developing countries in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia, they will live in the close to the downtown areas. And also the outer rings, unfortunately, consist mainly of informal settlements. What are informal settlements? These are ragtag houses that are made where the immigrants that are coming from the countryside, from the villages to the cities in search of job live. We're going to talk a little bit more about informal settlements shortly. So in the concentric zone model, the only similarity between the European cities and cities in developing countries is that the rich live in the inner rings. But unlike Europe, where the poor living out in the periphery, in suburbs, in high-rise settlements, and they live there legally. In developing countries, the very poor live in the outer rings, the suburbs, but they don't occupy that, they don't own those lands. They live there illegally, and they make buildings that are not up to level. Some of them are made of cardboard. Some of them are made of old zinc. They don't legally own those lands. They just come from the villages or the countryside, come to the periphery of these cities in search of jobs. So they will make any makeshift whatnot. We'll see it clearly when we look at watch the clip shortly from now. In terms of the sector model, a typical example is in Latin American countries, where the rich, the wealthy people will live in the inner city and in one or two sectors that radiate from that inner city outwards. And in those places in Latin America, there is sort of a spine wherein you have these rich people who live close to the public services that are there, close to the consumer services that are there, and also they have ready supply of utilities. They have ready supply of electricity, trash pickup, water, regular supply of water, which is not available where the poor live in distant places. For the multi-nuclear model, we see that in Southeast Asia, people of, mainly immigrants from China and other places, will reside in poor neighborhoods where they lack those basic utilities. But they live there, there are various nuclei depending on where you come from. So those that come from Thailand might live in one of these neighborhoods in Southeast Asia, and those from China or India will live in another neighborhood. I don't want to put so many diagrams for you, but if you take a look at your textbooks, you can see a few more of these diagrammatic representation. But let's take a look at the sector model here. In Africa, in Kenya, what do we see here? This is where the rich live. The very rich live here, close to the CBD. Then you have the business activities here. You will have the banks, insurance companies, offices of professional workers like management consultant, architect, etc. Then where do the middle income people, where do they live? They live around here and here. Where do the very poor live? Notice the very poor live in the outer suburbs, but they are very poor. Most of these live in what is called slums or illegal settlements. In fact, I was listening to the news, BBC American News the other day, and they said it is really sad. This is the first time I heard that. I knew there were problems there, but this part of Nairobi, Kenya, they say about 60,000 homeless people live in these places. 60,000 is not a small number. Homeless people live in these places. They sleep in the streets. So again, the rich live here in a sector from the central part going this way, another sector here, another sector here. The middle class, they live mainly here, but the very poor live in the periphery, in the suburbs, in informal settlements. This is an example of informal settlement. This is somewhere in India. This is a mixed match, or what I can call a mismatch. Notice the skyscrapers, notice some tall buildings. And if you drive 10 of, or let me say you drive half an hour, what do you see? Dilapidated buildings, makeshift buildings, slums where the very poor live in these peripheral areas, or what we can call suburbs. This is Mumbai, India. Again, if you drive 30 to 45 minutes, what do you see in the inner cities? Where the rich live, where the businesses are. You see skyscrapers, 30, 20, 40-story building, which is nice, fine. The rich live in these sectors, close to this building. But if you drive another 45 minutes, look at the type of houses in the slums. They are not legally occupied. They don't own the land. Some of them even don't have basic utilities. Look at the rusty zinc. Look at clothing hanged outside. Look at the structure. It is really a mismatch. Nice buildings, commercial centers, the rich living around these areas. You drive another 45 minutes to an hour. In the periphery or suburbs of these cities in developing countries, you see informal settlements. Any questions so far or comment? I would like to hear your voices. Of course, I've heard that from Rob. If there is something that is unclear, remember, you can ask. If something that you want to comment on that is related to what we're discussing, you're welcome to do so. This is another example in Africa. Notice the poor sanitary condition here. Notice these kids. Look at the type of house. Look at the type of housing. These are wooden. Some of them are zinc. The conditions are really, really deplorable. Now we're going to look at watch a 7-minute clip which encapsulates most of the problems that big cities face in developing countries. About 6 or 7 years ago, I had a couple of students who spent some time in Brazil, and they confirmed that these problems are these type of problems play out in Brazil. And of course, I'm from Africa originally, so I know the situation there. And a couple of students recently from Asian countries, Pakistan and others, say these are similar problems that play out in parts of Asia. So let's take a look at this clip. It really juxtaposes or encapsulates most of the problems that big cities face in developing countries.
This is a good day for 4-year-old Shahada. When he complained of hunger, his father had a piece of fruit to give him. Abdurrahim's struggle to feed his family began 3 years ago. That's when one of South Asia's biggest rivers, the Brahmaputra, washed away the land his family had farmed for generations. He now drives a rented rickshaw in a town across from his former home and earns about $1 a day. Barely able to afford the rent for this windowless, mud-floored shack, he's decided to move his family to Dhaka, the country's capital. He and his wife Shapla say they'll borrow the $10 they need for the trip and catch a bus within the week, joining a wave of some 400,000 migrants who move to Dhaka every year. The city they're moving to is growing so fast, each new census is quickly outdated. But local experts estimate it's now home to 15 million people. Dhaka is perched on the leading edge of a global trend. For the first time in human history, the world has become more urban than rural. By mid-century, some 80% of the Earth's population will live in cities, many of them in the exploding slums of the developing world. For good or ill, Dhaka is setting an example.
You're seeing the early future of the world, which is not a very pleasant thought at this point in time. Half of the population of the developing world will be in the urban centers within the next decade.
If you want to know what that might look like, Dhaka is among the best places to visit. The World Bank called it the fastest growing of the world's 20 or so megacities, urban areas with populations over 10 million. it's also one of the poorest. Vast slums dot every neighborhood and house at least a third of its people. In less than 15 years, the United Nations predicts Dhaka's population will surpass that of Shanghai, Mexico City, or New York.
Well, I think if you simply project the present into the future, then obviously we are headed to no good place.
At the end of British rule in 1947, Dhaka had just 250,000 residents. 2.5 decades later, when Bangladesh won independence from Pakistan, the city had nearly 1.7 million. Since then, rural poverty and frequent natural disasters have pushed Bangladeshis to Dhaka at breakneck speed. Each new decade has seen the city's population double. Everywhere you can see the damage wrought by this frenzied growth. By one rough estimate, traffic alone cost the city $2 billion a year.
I have adopted what I call car meetings. I take my colleagues with me in a car with a computer, and we talk and we hold our meeting in the car over the 2 hours.
Raw sewage flows into lakes and rivers so polluted they're beyond treatment. Electricity and water networks strain to cope with surging demand. Protests erupt periodically when routine water shortages last more than a few days.
Believe me, a serious water crisis in this city can bring down a government. That kind of magnitude water has acquired.
The new arrivals are often the hardest hit because most settle in slums. They have no title to the land they live on and can't get legal water or electricity, so they pay 2, 3, even 4 times official rates for pirated, unreliable connections.
If I'm a slum dweller, I don't have access to basic services. I don't have access to basic rights because remember, by definition, I'm illegally residing where I'm residing.
But new migrants keep pouring in. Some belong to Bangladesh's growing middle and upper classes who settle in the city's upscale neighborhoods. There, one-family villas are quickly being transformed into apartment complexes. Yet even those who end up in slums say moving to the city still offers the best chance for a better life. After moving to Dhaka 3 years ago, Mahmouda Akhtar found work in this garment factory. She now makes $36 a month ironing shirts, but hopes to be promoted to operating a sewing machine, which pays just over 40.
আগে যেমন সপ্তাহে একদিন মাংস খাইতে পারি নাই মাসে একদিন খাইতে পারি না এখন দেখা গেছে সপ্তাহে একদিন খাইতে পারি প্রতি সপ্তাহে খাইতে পারি ভালো বড় বড় মাছ খাইতে পারি সব ধরনের খাবারই খাইতে পারি আগে বছরে একটা জামা কিনতে হইতে আর এখন প্রতি মাসে একটা জামা কিনতে পারি
In the popular imagination, third world slums have been portrayed either as ladders for escaping poverty or traps where the poor get stuck. In reality, both are true, but those who climb out are quickly replaced by new migrants.
What is going to be the most scary part of this is the two worlds which in fact have been exploding side by side. The one is the world of the high-rise buildings being recreated for a small urban elite. And then there is the world of the slums.
Those we spoke with in Bangladesh said the question is not whether slums in a booming megacity like Dhaka should exist. They're the fastest growing part of this sprawling metropolis. And they herald Earth's future. Unplanned, hand-built, slum-packed cities are here and many more are coming. The real question a city like Dhaka can help answer is what concrete steps can make them decent places to live.
The government, I think, still continues to bury its head in the sand. Somehow if you bury your head in the sand, they will just go away. It doesn't work like that.
One deceptively simple suggestion: put control over vital services in the hands of a single municipal government, accountable to the people it serves. As in many unplanned cities of its size, Dhaka's police, utilities, and roadways are controlled by a dozen or more national authorities, mostly run by political appointees.
If you, in fact, challenge the mayor that he is not doing his job, he will say that I cannot look after law enforcement in the city, I cannot even control the traffic.
Some NGOs have tried to fill the gaps, for example, finding ways to secure legal water connections for slum residents. But their successes are small scale.
But I want the government to give political commitment. What has worked? What can we take forward that works well?
With an estimated 1 million people a week moving from their rural homes into cities across the developing world, those lessons are relevant far beyond Dhaka's chaotic roads and crowded waterways.
Anything that we can make work in Dhaka, probably we could make work in almost any other city. But the challenge is enormous. It's a dynamic system. Before you have sorted one, the problem becomes bigger and bigger by the day.
As do the slums, whose residents day by day, night by night, are rebuilding the urban world. On location in Dhaka, this is Solana Pine for Global Post.
Any question or comment? Okay, let's talk about suburbs, annexation, and other concepts. In America, as in other parts of the world, a suburb is a residential or commercial area that is situated in an urban area, but it's far away from the central city or the city itself. We are all familiar with suburbs. For instance, Tulsa has several suburbs, which includes Bixby and Sapulpa. Annexation is the process of adding land to a city legally. Annexation was once popular, wherein adjacent places will be willing for their land to be added to the main city, so that city will provide them with the utilities that they need. But more recently, most adjacent towns are not willing to be annexed by a big city that is close by. Why? Why do you think most of the small towns now would not like to be annexed by a big city that is next door? They prefer for themselves to be organized as to become a city rather than being annexed by a neighboring big city. Why do you think so? That they are reluctant now to be annexed by a neighboring big city. They would rather want to become a small city themselves. If you are annexed by a big city and that big city's tax, property tax, or even sales tax is high, you have to pay that tax. So that's why most of the small towns or villages would like to be developed to city, however small they are, so that they can govern themselves. And many times those small cities will have lower tax. But if you are annexed, you are incorporated into a big city, you will have to pay a higher tax because most of those big cities have higher taxes. They will provide you with the utilities that you need, water, sewage, trash pickup, but you have to pay more. But if you become a small city by itself, a small city is created, that city most likely will have a lower tax than the bigger city. When we talked last lecture, when we mentioned about metropolitan statistical area, what did we say? We said it consists of the city, the urbanized area, which is the city and the suburbs, and all the counties that are close by that have a lot of interaction with that county where the CBD is, the central city is. That leads to what is known as local government fragmentation. You have the city government, like the city of Tulsa. You have the county government, like the county of Tulsa. They have the adjacent county government, Roger County government, William County government, Craig County has their own county government, etc., etc. So there are so many small government bodies, fragmented government, that it is difficult for them to plan for the regional area, for Green Country, for instance, because you don't have that mandate. Like the Roger County can only plan for Roger County. The Craig County can only plan for Craig County. So there is a lot of local government fragmentation. What they have done now is to have a cooperative body where all of these cities and counties will be represented in what is called Council of Government. So the Tulsa Council of Government will be able to plan for the entire Tulsa metropolitan statistical area, which will include all of those cities in the various adjacent counties. It will also include the urbanized area of Tulsa, which will include the city of Tulsa the county of Tulsa, and all those suburbs of Tulsa. So the council of government is what is now utilized in most places to be able to do regional planning, because cities are growing. So you have to plan. We always see that they expand some of the lanes, some of the Highway 44. When I arrived, some areas it was 3 lanes. Now some areas is 4 lanes. Some of them now is almost 5 lanes. So that is part of the planning, but you can only plan for a metropolitan statistical area if you have these various local governments in one big body known as the Council of Government. Some call it Council of City and Council Government, others call it Federation, depending on where in the country you are. But the long and short of it, they have representation from all of these local government in one body where they will be able to plan regionally for the entire metropolitan statistical area. A case in point, the Tulsa metropolitan statistical area. Georgia County cannot plan for that metropolitan area. Even the Tulsa County cannot plan, they can only plan for Tulsa. But once they meet that cooperative body with representation at this Council of Government meeting with all of those representation from the county, the city government, or the suburbs, etc., they can be able to plan for the entire Tulsa metropolitan statistical area. The local government fragmentation is problematic also because you, apart from not be able to plan for whatnot, there have been cases where somewhere in New Jersey, one road, one highway, is it? No, just one of those city roads. Yes, it was not an highway, it was a city road. Part of 2 governments are in control of that area. The road is divided between 2 governments. If you are driving eastbound, it's 40 miles per hour. If you are driving westbound, it's 30 miles per hour, the same road, because it is under 2 different local governments. So that's a problem for local government fragmentation, because the same road, but you have 2 speed limits because there are 2 local governments. That road is divided between 2 local governments. But the major thing is to plan for the future. You have comprehensive urban planning for normally 20 or 30 years. You can only do that for the entire region of, for instance, Green Country, if you have people, representation in that Council of Government, which represent all of the counties and cities. Questions? Comment? This is annexation in Chicago. What do we see here? This was Chicago in 1870. Chicago 1870. By 1890, sorry, this was Chicago in 1837. Then by 1870, this area was annexed, legally joined to the Chicago proper. Then by 1890, all of this area was annexed to Chicago. Then by 1960, a few other places like this one and the O'Hare Airport were annexed, joined, became legal land of the city of Chicago. So why Chicago started so small a land area in 1837, by 1990, look at Chicago. All of these areas over time were annexed, and look at how the spatial extent of Chicago now. Urban sprawl. What do we mean by suburban sprawl? What do we mean by suburban sprawl? It is the growing of cities outwards growth of cities in low density suburbs. These suburbs are not heavily populated. These suburbs are deliberately expanding in low density areas because the builders of houses, of residence, are going to find the cheap land. And that cheap land is normally in the suburbs. But the issue with the suburban sprawl, those new suburbs are not continuously joined to the built up area. It's not continuously joined to the old suburbs or to the cities. They are distance away. It's not a one continuous territory. They are linked by roads though, but you have the inner city, you have the old suburbs, but these new suburbs, this sprawl, this expansion of the urban areas are low density areas where it is not one build up area. You might drive for some time, like 10 or 15 minutes on the road, you don't see any house. Then you go another 5 minutes, then you see this sprawl, the new houses, new estate development, distance away from the other existing built up area. So what then are some of the problems of sprawl? If a city is just going, if an urban area is just expanding outwards, what are some of the problems? Yes. Can somebody tell us one or two of the problems if you keep expanding your urban areas outwards, and it is not even continuously joined to the other existing area? Of course, there are roads that link freeways, highway, beltways, but you have a long area, an extensive area without no house before you meet the next house in the new estate development. So what are some of the problems?
You have to get utilities out there.
Exactly, and it becomes costly. Thank you, Hannah. You
also have to build businesses out there.
Yes. So you have to expand those places. Utilities like sewage, like water, electricity, they become more expensive because it's a long distance to get them there. Then, yes, shops, shopping centers, residential, what people require, especially consumer services and public services, you have to get them there. Then we are also losing agricultural land. Once they go to these sprawling areas, they clear the land to build houses. So we lose agricultural land because of the new housing. We also lose agricultural land because you have to expand the roads to get to these low density areas, distance away from the built up area. You have to get roads, you have to have freeways to get to those places. In constructing more freeways leading to those low density areas, distance away in the sprawling area, you have to clear the land, and you are losing more and more land for agriculture. You are losing more and more land for potential parks. You are losing land for green spaces. So that's another thing. Then there is one more. Getting these utilities out there, people living in those distant places. What is the other problem? When you live far away in the new suburbs, but distance away from the city, distance away from your workplace, perhaps 15 minutes away from a shop, a departmental store. What do you do more when you live in those distance places? You drive.
You have to travel farther.
Exactly. Thank you, Hannah. You drive a lot. You have to drive a lot. There was a time I went to, my brother and I went to Tampa for a conference. So we visited a family friend, and they're living in a suburb, a new suburb. He had to drive 15 minutes to get to the nearest store. You know, you drive a lot. Drive to your workplace, drive to the closest shopping center or mall. You should be ready to drive a lot. If you are coming to the city, not to talk about that, you drive so much. So in driving a lot, what happens? You consume a lot of fuel. By consuming a lot of fuel, you contribute in polluting the air pollution, because of what is released from cars, from vehicles, from trucks, etc. So those are the issues with suburban sprawl. More driving, loss of more agricultural land, expanding or extending roads to get to those places, and providing utilities like water, sewage, trash pickup, electricity, etc., etc. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about sprawl, and then they try to contain sprawl. Let's talk a little bit about density gradient. Density gradient has changed. In the early days, it was more people were living in inner cities, and as you go to suburbs, there were very few people living there. So there was a time, like in 1960, 1/3 of people were living in inner cities, 1/3 in suburbs, and 1/3 in villages and very small towns. Now, that's not the case. Density gradient is not even existent now, because it was saying that more people were living in inner cities, and as you go outwards, there were less people in faraway places. Now it's the other way around. So more people are now living in suburbs in America. About 50% of us are living in suburbs as of year 2000, and just 30% are living in towns, in cities rather, and then 20% in towns and villages. So that density gradient that was there in 1920, 40, 50, 60, up to in the 80s, is gone. So let's see how it plays out here. Density gradient was very useful as of 1900, the dark red. Then people moved. This area was where the density gradient was more people living. By 1960, only fewer people living here, more people into the suburbs. By 1990, the density gradient is gone because people are spread out, mainly in the suburban areas, more people living here. By 2010, it's almost about the same population in the suburbs and perhaps fewer people in the inner cities. So that density gradient that was there in 1900 up to about 1960, more people concentrated in inner cities and fewer people away as you go to newer suburbs has gone. So density gradient is no longer in America. Smart growth. Smart growth is a situation wherein some governments said, enough is enough. We cannot be just sprawling, expanding our cities. If you speak to your parents or your grandparents, they will tell you that 30, 40 years ago, South Tulsa wasn't that far south. What has been happening is suburban sprawl. They are building more houses in the southern part of Tulsa, expanding it to further south. The roads are there, but some of these areas have so low a density in terms of residential. What you ask your parents or grandparents, they will tell you definitely. So what some cities have been doing, like Portland in Oregon, they say we should have a limit as to how we can expand our cities. We don't want to lose all our cultural lands. We don't want to lose all of our green spaces. We don't want to make driving more expensive and make constructing more roads, utilities pick up, becoming more expensive because the city is just expanding outwards. They say we should have what is called smart growth. We should have a limit, a boundary limit, where we will stop people from just building new houses outwards. We should be inwards and upwards in a process known as smart growth. This is a typical example of smart growth in Portland, Oregon. What do we see here? There is a boundary line, urban growth boundary line. This is the line in purple. You cannot expand the city further. This is the boundary line for Portland, Oregon. There are some more land here, there are some more land here, but you cannot come here and clear land, estate development, build new residents. No way, it's not allowed. So the smart growth is those areas that we've been developing, let's build inwards. We have a lot of land area here we have not yet utilized. We have roads connecting residents here, but we have some areas here and here. And even here that we've not yet developed. So the smart growth policy says you should build inwards. Try to build houses, shopping centers, or whatever within this boundary line. Don't clear more land, reducing agricultural land, green spaces here and there to build more houses. No way. So in building inwards and upwards, you might have to build taller buildings, skyscrapers. But what happens if the city of Portland, for example, is growing in terms of population? Population is rising, and you have that limit to build inwards and upwards. What happens with the price of land over time? The price of land is going to increase because you have limited land area now where you can utilize for your various land uses, residents, commercial centers, etc., etc. Because you cannot sprawl further out, if the population of Portland is growing rapidly, there is competition for this limited land area because of this boundary line, urban growth boundary, you cannot sprawl. So over time, you can build inwards and upwards. But if the population is growing sharply, more businesses are being attracted to Portland. Over time, the land value is going to increase. The competition for land is going to increase. And what will happen with the poor? The poor might not be able to own a house because the land value has increased. They are building upwards, of course, and inwards within this boundary line area. Smart growth, which is good if the population is just relatively stable, but or stagnant or static. But if the population is rapidly increased, there is going to be stiff competition for land, and that could affect the very poor. Within the suburban areas, we are faced with two types of segregation. One is residential segregation. These houses are built purposely deliberately for single social class, those that can afford to live in that suburb. For instance, if you live in Chicago, if you want to own a house in Oak Park, a wealthy suburb, wherein your mortgage might be $4,000 a month, you must be making over $100,000 a month as a family. Otherwise, you're excluded because it's too costly. Some people are making even $4,000 a month yet to pay just $4,000 in mortgage, like in Oak Park or in Palo Alto in San Francisco. So some people are excluded because of the cost, the size of the land you need to own, and the location. The very poor just cannot go there. Then there are also what is called zoning ordinances, which will not allow some activities to be located in some areas. The zoning ordinances shows what land use you can set up in a particular area. This residential segregation, mainly due to social classes, also to some extent segregation by race and ethnicity. If you are poor, and in some cases, if you are a person of color, you cannot live in some of these neighborhoods because they deliberately find ways not, even if you have the money, for not to have too many people of color in that neighborhood, because they feel that over time, if that number increases, it's going to drop the value of the houses in that area. So that segregation can also occur. But the main thing is social class. If you cannot afford $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 a month mortgage, you definitely cannot live in some of these neighborhoods. So only those who can afford it can live there. So that is one of the segregation, residential segregation. The next is commercial segregation. Because of zoning ordinances, which specify what type of land use can be done in a particular area, you see that residential areas are distance away, at least 15-minute drive from commercial centers, and at least 30 to 45-minute drive from where the manufacturing activities take place. They are all in the suburbs, but they are in distinct areas due to zoning ordinances. As I said, when I went to Tampa, my friend had to drive about 15 minutes to get to the nearest departmental store. If he was working in a factory, he might have to drive about 40 to 45 minutes to an hour. He's still in the suburb to get to where that manufacturing center is. So the zoning ordinance is good to some extent because it doesn't allow manufacturing industries to be located close to commercial or to residential areas, preventing possibility of pollutants being close to residences. Any questions so far about suburban segregation, segregation by social class, and also commercial segregation of commercial activities? Do you have any question for me or comment? How many of you have lived in suburb where you have to drive at least 10 or 15 minutes to get to a store? Has any of you lived in this? Yeah.
I used to.
Okay. So how estimated time, were you driving like 10 or 15 minutes to get to a near store?
It normally took about 10 minutes.
Okay.
We lived in a smaller town outside the larger one.
Mm-hmm.
Like we lived in almost like a suburb of a suburb.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that is typical. For some, it's 15 minutes, but typically it's 10 to 15 minutes drive. Thank you, Rob. This is segregation by social class, socioeconomic status. This is the Indian Hill, somewhere I think in Illinois, in Ohio. Notice here, people make over $150,000 here, but they are distance away from Cincinnati, wherein people make below 75,000. But they are not too far away from places where people make about 100 to 149,000. So the very poor live distance away from the very rich. The very rich live here. And this very rich neighborhood, what do they say here? That the average income is about $250,000. Look at the demographic composition of this Indian village. 92% of them are white, 6% Asian Americans. So only 8% are people of color. 92% are white. This is a very, very rich neighborhood wherein it's called a village, but ironically, it's not a village. The village of Indian Hill, the average income, or rather, the mean income, the average income is $250,000 a year. Notice how far are they from the very poor, distance away. So this is segregation by social class. If you are very rich, you can live in this neighborhood. I have given an example of Palo Alto in San Francisco, Oak Park in northern Chicago. Do you know of any very rich neighborhood in Tulsa, part of the suburb of Tulsa, a very rich neighborhood, perhaps even a gated community? Okay, I'm not too familiar with the suburb of Tulsa, but there could be one or two neighborhoods where the very rich live in the suburb of Tulsa. This is the various transport era. Notice we started with sail wagon. And the important thing here is this various transport area helps to structure cities. It helps for some cities to expand or some cities to contract. Remember, from that sail wagon to iron ore, steam power, then to steel and rail. Rail helps in the growth of cities because people were able to travel by train to get to the inner cities, etc. Then came the auto and the air. Air and auto, air traveling and automobile helped to expand some cities. And that helped significantly in the 50s and after for the expansion of suburbs. As we get more roads, freeways and highways, we got more cars on the roads, more vehicles generally on the road, we're able to expand our cities. And more recently, we have satellite and electronics as the most recent transportation. But the major ones that led to the expansion of cities was this rail and the auto and air transportation. Okay, we talked about this suburban sprawl. As these places sprawl, there are offices and retail stores, as Robert said. Services are created in these places. Even though it's not one continuous territory, but we have roads that are there. So these offices and retail places that are created, that are set up in these sprawling areas, mainly are close to the freeways or the highways, are called edge cities. Okay. We've already talked about smart growth. We've talked about businesses that are located in suburban areas. What businesses are located in suburban areas, we know because so many people are living there. Shopping centers, malls, retailing. Yes, then we have factories. Again, not too close to the residential areas, but we have factories in suburbs because that is where they can get cheap land. Some offices have been relocated, in fact, in suburban areas. But some of these offices, the unskilled workers like the janitors and others are facing problems because these offices are located in new suburbs. The janitor cannot afford a house there. The janitor still needs to live in inner city. And if he doesn't have a good car or public transportation is not extended to that suburb, how does he or she get to work? That's a problem. That's a problem for some of them. That especially low unskilled workers working in these factories or in offices now that have been relocated in suburban areas. There are two clips here. We don't have time to watch them, but I will encourage you to watch them. One of them talks about sprawl, how we just keep sprawling. And they said it's more of a madness because it makes cities, maintenance of cities very expensive. The other one is unexpected changes in a sprawl, in a suburb, in Western Illinois. Because of time, we cannot watch them, but I will encourage you to watch them. Now, a couple of questions for you. 95% of all trips in America is made by the car. Okay, what are some of the, let's talk about some of the benefits. What are some of the benefits of public transportation?
Less fuel is used since more people are moved by one vehicle.
Yes, less fuel and less space, and of course, more people are moved. Let's say a bus. A bus can take, some bus can take up to 50 people. What else? Many a time yes.
People riding the subways.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What's one of the advantages there, or one of the benefits?
The fact that about the fact that the trains are long enough to hold many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, that's another advantage. We also should think about the space. Public transportation will use less space. Do you know that 1/4, 25% of all spaces in cities is just for parking? We have so many cars in America that 25% of our land area in cities, in urban areas, is for parking, to park cars, to park trucks or whatever. That's a lot. Then the cost of fuel in using a public transportation is lower. The spaces occupied by those public buses and trains is lower. And it is cost effective in most instances, energy effective and cost efficient. But we see the first statement I made here is 95% of all trips is made by cars. We have several places in America where we don't have any form of public transportation, or even if we have, it's minimal. So that is problematic. A good number of cities in America were not designed for public transportation. So that is a problem. What are some of the problems of public transportation? What are some of the limitations of public transportation?
Pollution, because I mean the exhaust smoke from cars and stuff can create pollution.
Yes, that's a big issue. What else? Can somebody else tell us another problem of public transportation, of driving cars and other things? Can somebody tell us one of the problems? Anybody else? Some of the limitations of public transportation. First off, it's not available in several places. But what else? Your privacy and flexibility is affected. Once you drive, you have your privacy and flexibility. You can wake up at 3 a.m. and go to McDonald's and or you can wake up at 3 a.m. and go to Walmart that operates 24 hours to get something. So that's part of the flexibility. Then public transportation in some places doesn't run regularly. They run well during the peak hours, and after that, they don't run frequently. My experience in Michigan, in East Lansing, Michigan, was that some of them did not run on time. There was one day in the summer where I was waiting for the bus 20. It should come at 4 o'clock. I was there at 10 minutes before 4. I waited till 4:05, and somebody told me, "You waiting for that bus?" It came at 3:45. I said, "What?" The bus came 15 minutes earlier before the scheduled time and left. You see, most of them are run late and the like. So, and they have the specific routes that they take. So public transportation is not that flexible enough. When I was in Athens, Georgia, if there is a big game day, football, college football, some buses will, some routes are even closed. You don't have public transportation some Saturdays because of big college football. Some of them detour a longer distance where it might be far from where I used to live. So all of those are issues of public transportation. The advantage of you owning your car is you have privacy, a little bit more safety, and there is flexibility. And psychologically, Americans like their cars. We like our cars. I used to ask in face-to-face classes, show of hands, how many of you will be willing to give up your cars for public transportation? Many a time of a class of 20 or 25, only one student will say he or she is willing, because that is part of us as Americans, to own a car, you know. So, but more importantly, most places are not set up in this country for public transportation. Okay. So some of the benefits of owning your car is comfort, flexibility. You might see it not too costly, expensive, but some of the costs of owning so many cars is, as Robert said, pollution and consumption of land. As I mentioned earlier, about 25% of our land areas in cities are for parking, just for parking. You go to a mall, see the number of parking spaces behind the mall. You go to several stores, the parking space. Then you have parking spaces that we pay for, closer to downtown. The other thing about so many cars on the road is traffic congestion. How many of you have been trapped in traffic, especially during peak hours in a big city? Can anybody share his own experience being trapped in traffic in a big city, especially during peak hours?
Yeah, when I lived in Chicago and I was trying to get out of the city during peak time, there would be times where a 20-minute drive turned into 2 hours because of how deadlocked it was.
Yes, that can be extremely difficult. It is worse off during the summer when there is good construction. That makes matters worse. We faced that went to Chicago in 2016, family of vacation. We faced that problem. Most of it, there was some construction and 30 minutes, where we should spend 30 minutes, we ended up spending 2 hours on that. I also faced that on one occasion. I was driving to Oklahoma City to drop my sister-in-law who was flying back to Australia, and it took forever. I became worried because, I mean, international flight, you need to report 3 hours before takeoff. Luckily, the airport there, Wilgujah's airport, was not too busy that day. So it's typical. We also faced that problem in Kansas City, Missouri on one summer vacation. So it's typical in big cities. Yeah, that's, you might be late to get where you're going to go to, and can you imagine going at 20 miles per hour on the freeway? How strenuous that is. So too many cars on the road. We have about 300 million cars in America. Traffic congestion can be a problem. We do try to expand our roads, having more lanes, having bypass roads, but it's still not enough, especially in big cities, more so during peak hours. These are the various public transportation. In the US, we see the biggest transit is this New York area. Over 4.2 billion people using transportation in this area, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC area. But when we go to other parts of the country, there is, like Oklahoma, there is not any clear-cut, reasonable public transportation. We have a few Oklahoma City, 1 or 2 buses and in Tulsa, but it's not something that is huge. And it's not just that. When I used to live in Michigan, in East Lansing, very limited public transportation. The long and short of it, America was not designed for public transportation. So it has grown in the east, northeast, and some parts of the west, but by and large, we see the figures many times below 35 million in most of these places. The smaller the circle, the fewer people using public transit. Public transportation in Germany, this is underground trail, this is overhead or elevated rail, and this is street cars. Now let's talk about the underclass. The inner city in America have people that unfortunately we refer to them as underclass because they don't have the educational standard or technical training, and they are faced with so many social and economic challenges. Most of them don't finish school, so they have inadequate job skills. Some of them don't even own cars, and public transportation might not be there, especially in very poor inner cities. A good number of them are homeless. They've lost their jobs, or they were in prison, they came out of prison, could not get a job. Then several of them are single parent. About 80% of inner city dwellers are single parent. 2/3 of those mothers marry out of, have kids unmarried. They give birth to kids without being married. And 80% of them are single parents in inner cities. Drugs and crimes, we know that it's a very big problem in a good number of inner cities. Consequently, because of the low tax base, they lack a number of services. There was a time in inner city Detroit, about 3 years ago, I had it on CNN, that if you call police 911 emergency call, it takes on average about 45 minutes for them to get to you. So imagine you are being attacked. That person might have been killed and buried in 45 minutes before a police vehicle arrives. So that was how bad it was in inner city Detroit about 5 years ago. There have been some improvement though, but I don't know how much improvement. I've been hearing that there has been some improvement. But those inner cities that are really poor, people don't have jobs. They are not seeking to get the jobs. Most jobs are not even there. So, and they become homeless, they don't have money, and some of them have just been released from prison. And because of all of these, the businesses are not there. How can those cities provide the basic municipal services like police, fire, etc., health, etc.? That can be a problem. So part of your last role-playing exercise, one of the questions talks about some of this economic or physical structure. Very old buildings, dilapidated buildings in a number of inner cities. Chicago is one. South Chicago, you have some very dilapidated buildings. You go to Philadelphia, parts of Bronx and Queens in New York, etc., etc. But there have been moves to revitalize cities, a process known as gentrification. You go there, you upgrade the city's building. These old buildings are big and spacious, you upgrade them. Once you upgrade them, in the process called gentrification, you increase the value and middle class people can move in. The big problem there in getting that is the low income people are displaced because they cannot pay the rent once those inner cities are gentrified. That is, you upgrade them, you renovate those buildings, and it becomes expensive. So you displace the very low income people, but the place is beautified and the middle income people can go in there, go to that area and live there. Public housing, we don't have much time to discuss it. What I'll tell you is that public housing is on the decline in America because the government used to sponsor or build a number of public housing, but some of the low-income people that were living there made it centers for crime, drugs. Police were called frequently. So the government, it doesn't see it too economical now to invest in public housing. Not just the economic aspect, but because of so many social problems in those public housing. The United States government is not doing much nowadays with public housing. They are there, but they are on the decline. They are not expanding public housing in the United States. This is gentrified city since Cincinnati. I used to go here to read advanced placement papers. This was it before gentrification, and look at how beautiful it is now after gentrification. In some parts of Europe, and even here, to minimize congested roads, some places have congestion charges, like in London. You pay a fee to use a road during peak hours, so that they try to discredit or try to dissuade some people from using public transport cars during peak hours. Then in some parts of the world, tolls increase during peak hours. Then some roads you have to have permits, and some roads in Europe in particular, it's complete ban. You are not allowed to drive in some roads during peak hours. They give preference to public transportation. Then the Uber, we talked about Uber recently, can help to minimize the congestion because 3 or 4 people can get into an Uber car and then reducing the number of cars on the road. Okay. Increasingly in Europe, we've not done much in America as yet. They are moving to what is called autonomous vehicles, independent vehicles, where you have a little bit of driving on some, not even any form of driving. It's driverless vehicle. This is in London, $15, about £11.50 if you want to park in some of these places, congestion charge, trying to reduce the inflow of cars into and other vehicles into London during weekdays, Monday through Friday. This is a driverless bus in Paris, no driver, it's automated, it drives itself. Whether I would like it or not, increasingly we'll be moving to less, they've tried it in Europe, America is, over time we'll be getting to that. Switching as petroleum reduces across the world, switching to power-driven electric cars, it has its own downside. We don't have time to go to the details here, but you have to be charging your electric cars frequently, unlike buying gasoline where you just fill your tank, drive perhaps 5 hours before you need to refill. Then sharing of vehicles is growing in Europe, certainly not in America as yet. Then driverless vehicles is on the increase in Europe and parts of East Asia. Okay, that's about it. Please submit your role-playing exercise 7, the last one, the last slide here, by 11:55 p.m. tomorrow. And then we'll move on to our last topic. We'll meet on Tuesday. Our last topic will be environment and resources. Most of the readings is in chapter 11 under energy. And then there are some selected pages. Okay. Any question for me? Or any comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I still have a few people I need to grade some outstanding assignments. I don't have all of them with me here, so one or two of you might. If you don't get any word from me by next week, please resend 1 or 2 of your outstanding assignment. Okay, have a nice weekend. I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, stay safe.
Bye. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Stay safe.